Hello, welcome back to ITWeb live at the Security Summit 2024. I'm joined now by Lundi Njomane. I'm saying that right? Good. Yeah. Good. First one of the day to get right. Who's the principal for WZ Capital and director for Jozi Angels. Lundi, welcome.
Thank you.
Cool. So yeah, we're going to talk a bit about venture capital. Obviously, the Security Summit is focused on cybersecurity, and I think it's quite interesting that I think this is the first year we've had venture capitalists at the event to talk about that. We've obviously had, in South Africa, we've had a few kind of startups that have gone on to do great things. I'm thinking kind of Intersect, Mimecast, Snowed, apparently, who are partners with the booth here. But yeah, so I think it's an area that's kind of slowly developing, but I think there's obviously a lot of growth in the area. I think one figure that I saw, or when we spoke to the information regulator, they said they've seen like a 200% rise in the number of reports they've had in a year. So it's obviously a hot growth area. There's a lot of demand in a kind of commercial way, and yeah, it's only going to get worse. I think it's only going to be better depending on which side of the bank account you're on. But yeah, give us an introduction to venture capital, the local scene, the local startup scene, the local venture capital scene. Give us an idea of how vibrant it is, and where the funding traditionally comes from to kind of help support these kind of entrepreneurs and startups.
Got you. Well, venture capital has come a long way in South Africa. We got into the space in around 2016, but prior to that there was some venture capital activity, but it's matured relative to what it was before. So you had a lot of people getting into the startup scene with new ideas and all of that. They didn't really know about VC, so it was quite niche. So today everyone knows about VC. If you are an entrepreneur, most likely VC might be the first route that you think, to get some capital. So we've seen a lot of startups kind of maturing as well. So you had a lot of people who had great ideas, but didn't know that an idea on its own is not something that is a business. So there's a lot of work that really needs to, be taken in order to make it an investable business. So with venture capital having matured, we've also seen the maturity of the startups alongside that as well. So it is vibrant. It is an exciting space. There's a lot of great opportunities. And with digital transformation, as we know, it's literally driving every segment of the world. It's really bringing forward quite a lot of innovation, which is exciting. So a lot of investment opportunities. So on our end, from a capital side of things in the VC sector, a lot of the capital has largely been brought forward by your DFIs. That's tended.
Sorry, DFI being?
Development Finance Institutions.
Okay.
Yeah. So they've kind of been playing quite actively, particularly in Africa. But currently, I've seen from our perspective a decrease in the DFI's involvement, particularly in South Africa, because from the conversations that I've had with some of them, South Africa is seen as a more mature market where capital should be, quite available
locally.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Which is fair, but there are some, nuances about is that capital actively participating in the VC space, or is it not? Is the diversity that capital is, creating within the VC space, or is it not? So those are some of the, changes and developments that I think are still in the works. But alongside that, there's also your government agencies. For instance, on our end, there's the Technology Innovation Agency, who has done a lot to actually, create a lot of development within the space, putting in some active capital, but also support structures to support the VC sector. So we've seen a lot of involvement from that perspective. And then there's also recently, as of 15th of March, through Jozi Angels as well. This is the other entity that I'm a part of, as you mentioned. There is GIZ, which is a German agency which has brought forward, or which together with BMZ, which is the German Federal Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development, development.
Okay.
They've recently launched a program called the Develop Ventures Program, where they're looking at providing matching funds to South African entities that are looking to actually, participate economically within South Africa. And that's a program that we're running together with an international partner called VC4A. So it's actually quite exciting. There's a lot of things that are actually happening, but there's still a lot more activity that I think is yet to be unlocked.
Okay. It's interesting you mentioned the international funds and international kind of investment coming in. And I think that's something I've seen from the news, and maybe you've got a better idea from being at the front line of it. I think there was quite a lot of investment a couple of years ago into Africa and sort of South Africa, and that seems like it's dried up from what I've been reading. Is that what you're seeing? Is it that, as you mentioned, perhaps the investment was coming into South Africa and they've gone, you know what, they've got enough money there that they can sort themselves out, let's focus elsewhere into Africa? Or is it specifically the sort of bigger macroeconomic picture of what's happening globally, and people are saying Africa's a bit of a risk, let's pull the money back into our own countries, back into America, back into Europe?
All of the above.
Okay, great. Next question. Cool.
So definitely, I mean, there's been a vacuum of capital. I think it had to be redirected to other spaces, and a lot of the capital that is available in the continent, probably more than 70% of it was not local capital, so it didn't come from local investors. So what that did is, as soon as that capital dried up, then it kind of really exposed how much capital has been flowing, within the continent, and I'm going to focus particularly within South Africa. And it shows that there's actually a big need for the private sector to participate in the sector in order to really unlock innovation in a more sustainable way as well. But what that capital has done is also identified or pointed out certain flaws within some of the startups that were funded, to the extent that there's a large reliance on venture capital being constantly available, flowing into them, that there was a little bit of neglect per se towards sustainability of those businesses. So I think there needs to be a balance. We also understand that obviously, a new business has got specific growth trajectory towards sustainability. If capital runs short prior to them being able to reach that, then obviously they won't be able to reach that sustainability. So we need to be able to plug that gap as long as there is a mark of sustainability that we're looking to achieve.
Okay. So I'm trying to think, it was probably going to say 3-4 years ago, probably before the pandemic. I remember, so ITWeb also has a magazine called Brainstorm, and I used to work on that. And there was a story that we did with Naspers Foundry, and we were kind of looking at the VC space, and there was this kind of gap, I think it was called the missing middle, between like your Naspers and I guess your kind of startups got to a certain point, but there was that kind of missing gap of being able to fund and get them to the next stage. Is that been closed up, or is that still a kind of an issue? And I guess that maybe comes back to the private sector, the institutional investors helping to kind of, is there an appetite there from those kind of guys?
So I would say it's still there to a certain extent, but there has been a little bit more capital probably kind of flowing in between. So for instance, on our end, we start investing from angel side, so that's through Jozi Angels. So those are your angel check size, and then through WZ Ventures and WZ Capital, or particularly WZ Ventures, we participate at following the angel checks. So then we come in at around your Series A, investments, and then there's a couple of players that come in at your Series B. So there's some capital that is flowing in between, kind of closing the gaps. But is it enough? No, it's not enough. Okay. And that's where the private sector needs to come in. But keeping in mind, the private sector is not going to come in just for the sake of. There has to be a commercial interest on their end, And venture capital in itself is driven by commercial interests. We look to make a profit. So there are those alignments between what private sector wants to achieve from a capital return perspective to what venture capital wants to achieve on a capital return perspective. But it's more than the capital. It's about the impact that can actually be made on the ground, but it's also about the impact that VCs can actually make within the corporates themselves or within the private sector itself
Yeah.
in making the industry quite vibrant and making the industry a lot more innovative and globally competitive as well. So there's gains to be had, but it's about where those gains can be achieved and where venture capital can actually meet with the private sector.
Okay. And then maybe if you can tell me a bit more from, I guess, Jozi Angels, but also from WZ, what your kind of investment philosophies are, what you're looking for when you're kind of going out to look at prospects kind of investments. Is there a particular focus? Is there a particular industry? Are you looking at the entrepreneurs themselves that kind of fund kind of behind the startup? Where's your attention? And if we were to put a startup in front of you, what advice should I be giving them to sell to you and to kind of get them to invest in them?
Sure. So I think first and foremost, any team that's going to be effective, or any business or any organization or structure that's going to be effective, has to have a strong team. It's always a starting point. And the type of teams, that we look at, and I kind of put it this way, maybe, we look for a team that has got the formality of, or the structure of a suit. A suit is someone who's, a bit more corporate in their approach, business person and all of that, right? Someone who's, and at the same time, there has to be an element of that radical innovation that's taking place. So with that creativity. So that radical nature of a creative, and then probably lastly, it's someone who's, or a team that's got the executable or the expertise of an engineer who know the intricacies of the technology that they developed. Exactly,
sure.
100%. So that's something that for us needs to be there holistically in order for us to see that as a viable team to invest in. Obviously, it's not going to be held just by one person. It could be one person in some cases where, you get someone who's that advanced in their approach, but it's very rare. So we look for that. And then the second thing that we look for is a business that's really innovative. So we're not looking for copy-paste. We're looking for someone who's actually come up with this, understands the intricacies of why this thing is important and the nuances of this particular thing. So that's what we look for. The idea in itself, it has to be great, it has to be innovative, but it's never really the gem in itself.
Okay.
It's actually the team. And then I think lastly, it's that like an innovation that is not narrow in its focus, but it has to have a large developmental element.
Okay.
It has to have, when I say developmental, it doesn't just mean a social initiative, but it has to have an impact, a massive impact in whatever sector that is participated.
So potential to scale.
Really exactly scale and unlock whatever values within that particular sector. So those are the types of startups that we look to participate and support. And I think that kind of covers the basis. Industry-wise, we're quite agnostic. So when we started out, we had a couple of industries that we actively invested in. There's a number of those, but we never went out with the intent to say we're looking for this particular sector. So we've been quite broad, which has given us quite a large scope of learnings.
Okay, and then obviously we're here at the Security Summit. It's a kind of something I hadn't realised. I've been in IT and sort of at ITWeb for about 10 years and hadn't been to the Security Summit before. And then just because of the nature of my job and I was involved in sort of client stuff. And then I came here, and to me it was like this whole different industry, still within ICT, but there was a lot of companies that I'd never heard of, never done business with, it's a whole separate part, the ecosystem within the bigger ICT ecosystem. So I think it's kind of this interesting massively growing part of the ecosystem. But cyber's obviously this kind of sort of niche area. Are you finding that there's many kind of cyber startups startups locally? Are you finding that there's entrepreneurs coming to you with a kind of cyber cryptography type solution, or is it something that you think needs to evolve? I mean, the fact that, as I said before, we've never had a VC panel at the Security Summit, and now for the first year we're having that. Is that kind of indicative of what's going on in the wider kind of space, or is that just because we hadn't thought of it before? What are you finding?
So I think it's probably largely been happening underground, because same here. There aren't a lot of startups in the cybersecurity space that we have seen, and we see quite a large number of startups coming through. But from the cybersecurity side, it's few and far between, far less than what I think is necessary, particularly with where the world is moving forward. So the hope is that events such as this are able to kind of unearth participation within that sector, and also bringing in the VC side of things as well, to say, okay, fine, there is capital that's available, there is a particular need that cybersecurity startups are fulfilling, and there's active cases of them having participated in this particular space. So I think it is definitely necessary, and it's something that's yet to really reach where it needs to reach, but hopefully the signals that marriage, that's
Okay. Now, how do you think we kind of encourage more entrepreneurs? I mean, so one of the guests we've had already this morning is involved in a hackathon. He does various things at the summit, but the part of that is he kind of goes and mentors at the hackathon. And I think some of the stories he was telling me, they basically got 24 hours to kind of come up with solutions, and independently of the industry, they don't know the vendors in the security space. They've kind of come up with their own solutions, and they're starting to kind of develop very basic versions of what some of these kind of multinational, international vendors are producing. So I think there is the potential there. So how do we cultivate those kind of young developers and marry them up with the suits, and marry them up with the kind of the operations teams, and kind of get that whole ecosystem growing, so that we can put them in front of you in a year's time, 2 years' time, and then you can start kind of helping them to scale to Africa, scale to the world.
Sure. So hackathons are definitely, the first point of call in my books, that is. But within the hackathons as well, if they're happening in corners where no one is really participating from the suit perspective or from the VC side of things, then it's not going to create that nice flow where there's frictionless flow of capital and startups that are viable. So it's literally about having the hackathons, but having the VCs have sight of the innovation that's taking place, the need that's taking place within those particular spaces. And for me, that's where the gap really needs to be plugged. But also from just thinking about from the corporate perspective. So largely, some of the things that we do, we speak to a lot of corporates who are interested in investing in particular viable startups, but obviously they have to be at a specific maturity levels. So corporates have a growing need to secure their infrastructure.
Sure.
And there's a large, push towards digitization within the corporate framework as well. But you can't digitize without securing, So if there's a vacuum from the security side of things, it leaves those corporates vulnerable, regardless of how innovative their infrastructure might be. So I think there's really a need, for that participation. So if corporates are able to say, okay, fine, we are sponsoring hackathons, and these are the challenges that would like these particular founders to solve, and then there's also some capital that's coming in. VCs are also looking at it from a particular perspective. Then it starts creating a network around the cybersecurity startups.
Okay. And I think before we kind of came to the summit, Snowed, who are kind of one of the partners with this booth, I was chatting to their co-CEO, Christy Meherig, and she was kind of saying she was one of the co-founders of Law Trust, and she was saying that I think essentially she'd gone to work in the US, she'd taken Law Trust and kind of grown it to be kind of accepted internationally, but certainly it was kind of being used internationally. She went from Law Trust to another international firm, and was kind of seen that from America. and now she's kind of working at Snowed, who've got, I think, operations in Vietnam. They've got operations in the UK. But I think there was this kind of, from what she was saying, there was this almost that there's perhaps a resistance for SA corporates to buy from SA companies, to kind of trust that local is lekker, if you know what I mean. So how do you think we kind of solve that and get these kind of entrepreneurs, because they've got to start somewhere,
Sure.
And there's no point in kind of having this great product and then having to fly off to Europe all the time to go and sell it when you've got an actual captive market here. How do you think we get over that, where I guess the local market trusts in the local products and the local suppliers?
That has been a challenge for a very long time in South Africa.
Sure. Sorry, I've just thrown this massive problem I need to solve.
In order to be successful in South Africa, you have to go somewhere else and then come in and be validated as successful because you are successful somewhere else in the world. So look, it's a big problem that I think we have, but part of that problem has got to do with, once again, the maturity of a particular industry. If we in South Africa, we see that we have, a vibrant ecosystem around whatever sector, whatever speciality that the world sees valuable, then we start seeing it as valuable, and I think, success cases such as Snowed do prove that within South Africa or even within Africa, there are gems that we can unlock. But once again, from a corporate perspective, coming back to what we mentioned earlier on, they do want to know that we can trust this particular technology or this particular team with a specific task within our structures. So, there's an approach that is used, fairly, often by, international corporates, where they create a sandbox, giving you the opportunity to test out whatever, technology that one has. So if corporates said, within our environment, we understand there's a lot of innovation that's taking place, let's give these smaller guys an opportunity to participate in a sandbox environment, and see what they do, see if they've got the skill sets that we need in order for us to be able to trust them with more, then I think that becomes a good starting point. So you literally give them incremental responsibility to say, okay, fine, you've proven this, and then let's add more. So then it starts creating an environment that allows the smaller guys to start participating with the bigger guys, then the bigger guys to start trusting the smaller guys in being able to execute.
Okay, fantastic. I think with this whole new coalition government, maybe there's a Ministry of Small Business Development. Maybe if there's a position comes up, you might want to go and sit there. Lundi, that's been great. Thank you so much.
No, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. That's been Lundi Njomane, who is from WZ Capital, and Jozi Angels.